this is a huge honor for me to be speaking at the SANS Institute. I love the SANS Institute, and this forum is so wonderful, bringing everybody together in the OSINT community. I mean, the digital environment is so dynamic and it's changing every day. So it's really important for us to exchange insights and trends that we're seeing, through our individual work. And yeah, huge honor. And what I'm going to present today is, hope it touches upon a few things that the other speakers will discuss as well, but I just wanted to highlight one particular case study of election interference in Latin America, a part of the world that's often overlooked by global news. And so just highlighting certain activities and trends that we're seeing with regards to election disinformation and the hiring of third-party marketing firms to support government interests from foreign government interests. So super excited. Let's get started. So this is the title of my presentation, and we just discussed it. So really quick background about myself. I am an intelligence advisor at Nisos. I also work as an adjunct professor at Florida International University. I have a PhD in social psychology. And prior to this life, I worked in for the Department of Defense, doing open source intelligence for US Southern Command, so focused on Central, South America, and the Caribbean. And finally, it all started being a social media intelligence analyst with Dunami, which is now part of Babel Street. I'm sure some of you might have heard of that tool. So yeah, a little bit about myself. You can find me on X. I don't have many followers, but I'm just starting to be a little bit more public facing. I've been behind the scenes a lot longer, so appreciate the follow. And apologies, I'm recovering from a cold. #MomLife. So thought that hashtag is appropriate for this audience here. Quick agenda. I'm going to define what disinformation is. It's important to really differentiate that from misinformation, which is often confused by some not really working in this space. We're going to discuss the geopolitical setting. So one of the things my team and I look out for when we're doing information operations investigations is who would benefit from the narrative that is being promoted, right? So we'll get a little bit into that, how we discovered this one account that was a huge influencer in basically all elections in South America. We're going to focus on the elections in Colombia, though, because that one had a lot of, there was a lot at stake for the United States government. So it was really interesting to see how much effort went into promoting a narrative focused on Colombia. We finally were able to unmask the user behind this account, the operator or operators, plural, and which revealed motive, right? And the kind of impact that had, and might have had actually, likely had, and some post-publication behavior. We did publish this investigation. It's and some news coverage was also associated with it. And so the actors that we identified did see it. So that was interesting. And some OSINT key takeaways. So let's go. Really quick, I did not create this graphic, but it is amazing graphic. And I just wanted to highlight the difference between misinformation and disinformation. So in misinformation, you spread information that can be misleading, unintentionally, like you don't know that the dates are wrong or that maybe there's a half truth to what is being spread. Whereas disinformation, it's fabricated deliberately and manipulated to have an impact. And I like to look at disinformation campaigns like a marketing campaign, right? It starts with a requestee. It goes to a planning stage, or research stage rather, planning stage, operational stage, which is where we see it, then a review, and then it goes back to, replanning to see what was a hit, what caught traction, what didn't, right? So it's a deliberate campaign. And one really good way to understand, the intention behind a narrative is to know who is behind it. So when you know who is behind it, you'll understand the why. And one quick note to also point out is that disinformation thrives during political unrest. And I think we all know that, especially practitioners in this space, because these actors, these sock puppets, these bots can actually just use real footage of political unrest to have impact and gain followers, and then, sprinkle in misleading information without going noticed. And so it's a tactic often used by state actors or marketing campaigns or marketing experts supporting foreign government interests. So this is the star of the show. This is the account we unmasked, Chalecos Amaril. So I'm going to refer to it as chalecos just for ease of pronunciation, because it's chalecos amarillos, which in Spanish means yellow vests or yellow jackets. You'll see a lot of different characteristics that many of you might be familiar with, like anonymous. So the decentralized hacktivist group, right? It borrowed a lot of brands from different movements that are typically associated with anti-government movements, basically protests. The Yellow Vest movements in France, there are, the working class protesting against economic policies in France. So a lot of different strategic branding, basically, is what I'm trying to say here. And we'll go over some of the other characteristics and why this account stood out to us in a little bit. So some quick background. Why this target, right? Why did this account focus so much on Colombia? Or what were we seeing that was relevant to Colombia? Well, Colombia had presidential elections in the spring of 2022, but even a year before that, you could see this account really focusing on some of the domestic issues that Colombia was having. Also, as a result of the pandemic, a lot of economies throughout the world, suffered. And so governments were trying to implement different economic policies to help with that. So a lot of people, did not like that. And then protest leads to other things and other types of issues and so forth. So it just grows. But Colombia is the closest South American ally to the United States. This is a picture of the United States and Colombia's militaries doing a joint operation or exercise rather. And so the United States and Colombia also collaborate on a lot of national security issues and economic issues. The other thing I wanted to point out here, and I'm going to say leftist leader because they do refer to themselves as izquierdistas. So what I want to say here is that by leftist leader, I mean not as conservative as what has been decades of leadership in Colombia, right? One of the candidates that was running for president and won the presidency, by the way, was a former Marxist militant through an organization called M19. So that leadership would cause a lot of change in the relationship between the United States and Colombia and benefit other countries in the region that the United States has economically sanctioned. That aligns a little bit with that political ideology. And some of those include Venezuela, Cuba, and Nicaragua. So who is this candidate and current president of Colombia? Gustavo Petro. As of June 2022, he is the president-elect of Colombia. Again, he is the first leftist president of Colombia, so aligning again more with the values not aligned with the conservative ones that have been traditionally, leading Colombia's government. He is a former senator as well, and he was friends with the late Cuban president Fidel Castro, which many of you might have heard of, and the late Venezuelan president Hugo Chavez, which many of you might have heard of as well. And also one thing that, just to give a background, the United States and Colombia do work on joint operations to tackle narco trafficking, right? Because a lot of cocaine leaves Colombia to different parts of the world, including Western Europe, United States, everywhere, just everywhere. And this is a huge problem that requires collaboration. And he is a friend of the FARC, which is the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia. It was a Marxist-Leninist guerrilla group. Now they are a political party. So interesting stuff. Last but not least, and if you have any more questions about the geopolitical aspect of this, please feel free to ping me on the side. So what was his stance and why would this have presented or changed the dynamics in the region between the United States and Colombia should this president come out as successful in the campaign? He is critical of US economic sanctions. He did not favor anti-narcotics agendas. And on top of that, he promotes the rebuilding of diplomatic relations between the United States and Venezuela. So remember, a few slides ago, I asked, when we're looking at a narrative online, who would be the beneficiary of that narrative. In this case, we started to think that Venezuela, and that's why I put it in bold, might be the country or government that would have interest in having this president come out as the president of Colombia, this presidential candidate. So a quick timeline. So there were anti-government protests in the spring of 2021 in Colombia, and all of a sudden we saw this mysterious Twitter account. I know it's X now, but I will refer to it as Twitter because back then that's what it was. Chalecos came out, infiltrated Colombia-based political discussions and posted misleading content. It used domestic hashtags used by activists in the region, so it was able to really put itself in there. And it also echoed media from Russia, Iran, Cuba, and Venezuela, their Spanish language news outlets, by the way. And so it was just very curious. And then we started seeing that it engaged in several campaigns to help put Petro in a leadership position throughout the election cycle, leading the polls. So yeah, and after that, he did win the presidency. He's the president of Colombia. He met with US officials because, again, that close-knit relationships, it makes sense. And less than a couple months later, there were military exercises in Colombia that included Russia, Iran, and China, among others. And that was the first time that particular military exercise was hosted in the Western Hemisphere, where we had these state actors that the US considers to be adversaries. So just interesting how that all took shape. Now, our hypothesis was that the Venezuelan government was attempting to influence perceptions in Colombia with the goal of achieving political change, which is to get Petro elected. And what we found by attributing the account, by unmasking it, that we believe it was likely it was Venezuela's government through a marketing firm with links to the government. So I'm going to go piece by piece throughout this network, but this is the entire network involved in this operation and how it kind of worked together. So we'll start here. This is like a mall directory, if you will. So we're starting with Chalecos and his network of immediate networks. We saw, this is a good way to kind of highlight how we use social listening tools and then hone in on something we find weird or interesting. I am a huge advocate for, if you find something weird in your investigation you did not expect to find, so definitely take time to investigate that a little further, because in open source intelligence, you are filling a gap, something that is not known. So by kind of exploring and pulling the threads on the weird thing, you might be able to provide some intelligence that nobody else might be tracking. So that said, we found it weird that Chalecos was retweeted 8,000 times at least, by the way, because a lot of inauthentic users were deleted by the time we looked at this. In Colombia, so users that were geo-referencing themselves to Colombia, that were geo-fenced to or geo-located in Colombia. And it's, when we looked at what that tweet was, one of them was, actually it was several, but one of them was saying that SOS in Colombia, they're killing us, right? That's the hashtag that you see there in Spanish. And it was calling the government, the previous government, a narco state government, right? And they're saying that the police forces are massacring protesters. So a lot of trigger words that cause a lot of divide that really add fuel to the fire during a really politically sensitive time in the country right before elections. So planting the seed is a saying, I guess. So why did we find this weird? Well, this account had no identifiable information, yet it had a really large following, and it did not really use automated posts in its profile. So in its account, it was really engaged with the community. So it was interacting, and just commentary is original, and you could tell there is a human behind this account, or many. And so it also echoed a lot of Venezuelan state-sponsored news and interacted with suspicious accounts, which I'll show you in a bit. The weird thing was that it was active 22 hours a day on average, which is not humanly possible unless you are doing it from the hospital, I imagine, without sleep and a lot of caffeine. So we assessed that there were several users behind this account. And the tricky thing is, which I also mentioned a few slides ago, is that it posted true, half true, and false information, but that false information was sprinkled among, real events. And it adopted domestic hashtags in target countries. And by the way, this account was active since December 2018. It was eventually suspended in March 2022, and not because of our investigation, for something else, violating the terms of service at Twitter. But long story short, it was able to operate for a long time and was able to gather a lot of influence in that time frame and really address different elections throughout South America. So this is an example of how it sprinkled disinformation within the true, footage of like protests and other activities in Colombia. There was a car bomb that went off in a Colombian military base in the border of Venezuela and Colombia, and it's called Cucuta. And you'll see here that it said it was not a car bomb, and that the media, the drug media, is mislabeling this. And so it said, share what you know. And if you can see there in it mentions a few notable profiles. One is Russia's RT in Spanish, and the other one is Gustavo Petro's Twitter account. So that was already revealing to us from a content analysis perspective that it wanted these really influential actors and that align with its ideology, basically, right, to promote what it was saying. Did it? Not that one, at least. So did they, rather? So yeah, this is another example of how it sprinkled disinformation. During anti-government protests in Colombia, there was a police vehicle that was near the protesters, and then Chaleco said that it ran over protesters, but Associated Press did a fact check on it, and in fact, it did not run over protesters. So this is already, kind of sowing the seed again on perceiving that previous administration as really unfavorable, like just trying to make that narrative. So that was interesting. And a couple of more instances in the content analysis of why it stood out to us, again, pursuing the weird, and how we were able to assess it was trying to really contribute, not necessarily enhance the activist's voice, but cause political change in Colombia, or at least contribute to it. Gustavo Petro wanted a campaign. Hey, we're looking for 5 million votes for Congress, to kind of flip it so that it's more favorable, the Congress is more aligned with his particular policies. So of course, Chalecos in November 2021 did this great political marketing campaign saying hashtag 5 million votes and retweet all these accounts. These are our partners, right? It didn't say that, but that's what it basically is indicating by listing all these accounts. So November 2021, these were all active accounts. When we looked back in February 2022, they were all suspended from Twitter for violating terms of agreements, for potentially inauthentic, coordinated inauthentic behavior. So this is one way we were seeing that this particular account was interacting with inauthentic users to cause political change in Colombia, or to contribute to it. Another campaign, Gustavo Petro put out a post about the working class and how, the sellers of avocados and honey and bees, and pie, by the way, is empanadas for those of you, this just translation is funny. But anyways, he noted avocado and bees. And so all of a sudden, his supporters started using avocado and bee emojis in their profiles on Twitter. And not only did the actual supporters of his do that, so did those inauthentic users. And this is one example. I'll go back to the previous slide. Diana Ortega used the avocado and bee emojis, and you could see it highlighted here. Okay. And these are examples via follower wonk, which is a cool tool to use for, searching profile keywords. Highlighted, these are true supporters actually using it. So these inauthentic accounts are really trying to integrate themselves into the narrative and look like true supporters of Petro, even though they were probably not real. This is all for a reason. And last but not least, I had mentioned earlier that it would kind of repeat and recycle some news that was posted by Russia's RT in Spanish and other affiliated media outlets, as well as Iran's Spanish language news outlet, Hispan TV. And here we're just highlighting some partnerships that Venezuela has with these different news agencies. So again, Venezuela, a lot of indicators that this would benefit Venezuela and aligns kind of with the narrative that Venezuela puts out. And I also highlighted Cuba because there is a network of sock puppets at Cuba promoting Cuba's policies and narratives regarding the embargo with the United States and other things. So putting that all in there, it interacted with this account at some point, all those. So now the fun part, I mean, that was fun, but this is like the most fun. So attribution. So what clues did we follow to unmask this account, right? So this is a very good example of bad OPSEC. So for those of you who kind of, brainstorm some things you should look out for when trying to pull the threads, here we saw that Chalecos Amarillo posted a Telegram channel in its bio, right? It's called Global Revolution Org. So we went into that Telegram channel and it's public, so anyone can really access it if you have a Telegram account. And then we saw that the administrator or the admin for the actual channel was a digital persona named Realito Digital, right? And so we're like, oh, that's interesting, Realito Digital. Who is this, right? Who is this admin of a channel posted at Chalecos that can kind of highlight who might be the operator behind this? So we looked into that and we found that Realito had at least 2 accounts on Twitter, but that were suspended for violating its terms, of course. And so I just wanted to highlight a few of the things. And this was retrieved using the Wayback Machine, by the way. I love that. It says it does political marketing, which meets the mark on what we were seeing. And then it also references Chalecos in its profile. So we know there's a connection, right? Outside of just Telegram, these historical accounts highlight that relationship. And what do you know? It geo-references itself to Venezuela. So, check mark on that one. So we pursued to know who is behind Realito, and we got a name. As OSINT investigators, we love names, especially if they're not very common. But in this case, Rafael Nunez, which is the operator behind Realito, is not too common and not too unique, but enough for us to find more information about the individual. So we did. This individual is a marketing professional, so he is very open about what he's doing and the companies he's working with. And again, we see some overlap with how he describes himself on Twitter, marketing, political marketing. And also on his Instagram was really interesting. It was open as well. Excuse me. He met with Venezuelan government officials, one of those being a leader in the Venezuela's telecommunication firm, CAN TV. And so that's in an office setting, so I'm assuming this could be a official meeting. And by the way, the marketing agency he affiliates himself with on LinkedIn, which you see in his cover photo, is Digital Communication VE. Digital Communication VE did have government contracts. So, and we'll dig a little bit into that further because that was our next clue. So we know Realito is him. That's his digital persona. Cool. He does geo-reference himself to Venezuela, right? And he affiliates himself from a business perspective with Digital Communication VE. So let's see what that's about. We looked at its employees and its leadership, and one person that stood out to us was another individual. So we have another name. We love those. This is Jason Raseo. This name is very unique, so that was very helpful. Another marketing professional. And he lists Digital Communication VE as being a strategic and intelligent digital marketing firm. So cool, marketing professional, excellent. What did he do before this? So some background, he actually served as director of social media at Venezuela's Ministry of Communications and Information, so the MINSI. He retired in 2016 and pursued this private sector marketing initiatives. And the thing is, we looked into him. We were able to acquire a lot more information that we published, and we found that he had an active government email with Venezuela's National Institute for Socialist Training and Education. So that was interesting, but still, we're kind of understanding a little bit what the motivation might be here, but still nothing. We're going to continue building on our assessment, our hypothesis, and trying to find additional indicators, right? So we looked at Jason's Twitter account. He has several, and one of them, which didn't have many followers, but one of them did. The people that did follow him in this non-influential Twitter account that belonged to him were really high-level government officials in Venezuela. Big, since Hugo Chavez's time, Diosdado Cabello is one of them. Another one is Venezuela's former Minister of Foreign Affairs, Jorge Ariaza. And you'll see, yeah, these are his followers, right? And these people have like thousands of followers. So for them to be following him is quite interesting. But there's one really bad OPSEC thing that happened here on their end. And so this kind of revealed a lot more. And what we did was looked at Digital Communication VE's social media page, and we saw that their public profile page was created in 2009, and it was called Great Patriot Newspaper. And Great Patriot Newspaper, it was quite interesting. It started as a university initiative, but it had guest speakers like Fidel Castro and Hugo Chavez, the former presidents of Cuba and Venezuela. And so, interesting. So we found the website affiliated with that newspaper and saw that it was registered by the ministry, so the MNC, right, where Jason had worked before. And that was interesting. So what it did was actually recycle this page and rename it to this private sector marketing agency. But it all started with this newspaper that was likely supported by the MNC, right, to put out a narrative to counter US influence, which, by the way, was publicly disclosed by them. So that was really interesting to just find that connection. So I'm going to ask again. So this narrative that Chalecos is putting out, who would it benefit? Who would be the beneficiary of that? So this is the president of Venezuela. This is Nicolas Maduro. And, it just, when we kind of had that aha moment with this Scooby-Doo reference came to mind. So that's that. So what happened afterwards, subsequent events, he was elected. Not saying Chalecos was the sole reason for that, but definitely helped frame the public perception of the previous administration in Colombia that might have facilitated or could have facilitated Petro's his victory in the presidential elections. And again, I mentioned earlier, there all of a sudden, a couple of months later, there was a military exercise in the bordering country that involved a lot of what the United States would consider very adversarial actors. So I'm going to backtrack a little bit. So we unmasked the account. We found out that Chalecos is likely operated by Ralito and his team, because Chalecos listed a Telegram channel, and its administrator of that Telegram channel was Ralito Digital. When we looked up Ralito Digital's previous profiles, they did affiliate themselves with Chalecos Amarillo. And then when we looked at who is behind Ralito Digital, it was Rafael Núñez, who works with Digital Communication VE, whose CEO was a Venezuelan government official, basically, for the Communications and Informations Ministry, and who used previous government-affiliated, newspapers to counter U.S. information, and Western, really, and U.S. and its allies. It was supported by the Ministry of Information and Communication. So our assessment is that it is highly likely putting out a narrative that favors Venezuelan government interests. And so they found our research, of course, and they were suspended from Twitter again before our research even went out. And, I'm not saying this might be the reason for it, but something that was different because it was able to operate over such a long period of time is that it was repeating news about the conflict in Ukraine from Russia's perspective, and so that might have been flagged as false. And so that could have potentially flagged the account on Twitter's end. And so, but this is just our assumption. That's the one different thing that it did differently during that time frame. So just wanted to highlight that. But here you have some translated commentary from the administrator in the Telegram channel. They said, even when they suspend us, they talk about us on Twitter. Our report was covered by regional newspapers and also US ones. And then 2 months later, they actually posted our investigation in the Telegram channel. And they didn't say that it was false, but they're just saying that, investigators are claiming that they're spreading disinformation because they repeat news from Hispan TV, RT, and other affiliated news entities. So some general key takeaways. When just as a general internet user or social media user, don't trust all the sources if you don't know who it is. And the source of information often reveals the true motive for a campaign you might be seeing or digital activities. So I did highlight that info operations usually have kind of like a cycle. So there is a request that goes in, a research phase, a planning phase, kind of like cyber attacks too, by the way. So this is just a good framework to work with. So request, research, planning, operation, review, and new requests would likely go in to kind of have bigger impact. As I mentioned in the start of this presentation, the digital environment is always changing, right? So as we as investigators adapt to that, so do malign digital actors. So that's one thing to keep in mind. One operation doesn't necessarily mean that the same tactics will be used in the next round. So just putting that out there. And I really want to highlight the research phase here, because there are oftentimes that academics are studying different aspects of, disinformation and public perception of information and whatnot. And just know that there are academic institutions studying even how people fact check their information. And that in itself can be used in IO, right? In the planning phase, like, okay, this is how people check their information. Let's make it so that they, kind of believe or can't get to that point or something. And now some OSINT key takeaways, and there are a lot of bullets here. I'm just gonna highlight a few. Look for trends and patterns. Don't be afraid to pull on the threads that look weird to you or that you weren't expecting to find. And I know this could be, these kinds of investigations can be a little bit politically, charged. So it's important to keep objectivity. In this case, we let the research kind of leave the research. And so I just wanted to highlight that. And last but not least, and I know Nico is a huge advocate of this, be supportive of your team. There's OSINT mental health. My career started looking at the Islamic State propaganda and mapping out different networks on social media. And that was very, very disturbing. And the war in Syria. And then, when you're looking at these anti-government protests, there's also a lot of disturbing imagery and video footage that you come across. So it's important to be there for one another. I really appreciated comedic relief from my colleagues throughout my career. It's super important to just keep it light, you know what I mean? And so, yeah, I just wanted to highlight that as something just for us to be there for one another. It's extremely important because it's not an easy career in that sense. Thank you so much. And that's my presentation.